the continuity of this format, and then we'll have an open discussion as well as questions on particular topics. I want to say the next presenter is Ginger Hitzke. So Ginger is the president of Hitzke Development. She has over 20 years of working knowledge of discretionary land use entitlement processes, including knowledge of general plans and amendments. Oh, she also serves on our planning commission, although she's not here as a commissioner, and has served on several numerous boards, including Circulate Housing, Scenic Housing Federation, that I worked with closely in the past, as well as Boys and Girls Club of San Marcos Chamber of Commerce, Inclusive Action for the City, which is an LA-based economic development organization. Ginger is well respected in the community, and I really appreciate your time. So we have a little bit of a different format for Ginger. Instead of a PowerPoint, we will be having a discussion about the topics we had arranged prior to this conversation. So if you can put on the next, the next slide. Thank you. So Ginger, can you hear us?
I can. Hi, Murtaza.
All right, excellent. So Ginger, the first topic that is up there is crisis of affordable housing and climate change. You are an expert on affordable housing, and the world we live in around us is changing. And sometimes the two of them, both of them seem to be going in the wrong direction. For most common people, it's a vicious cycle where one worsens the impact of the other. Can you elaborate from what you've seen from your experience, how these two crises kind of create this kind of vicious cycle?
Sure. So as we had discussed earlier, you know, and please forgive me, I speak pretty simply and I am very opinionated, so I will be completely sprinkled with a ton of editorial. People hate housing. And unfortunately, because of, you know, we're all emotional creatures, and, you know, people bring their emotions to their electeds, and electeds make decisions. And it just so happens that, you know, housing is not a very popular thing. If you want to fill a city council chamber with tons of voters, bring up housing, and then folks will come out. So if you flash forward through California's history on its land use patterns, because of those emotions, we have pushed housing out further and further. Sandag's official, you know, or maybe unofficial statement on what to do with housing in previous years in the 80s and 90s, when trying to address where to put housing units, the idea was to blow off steam into Riverside County, which is where I happen to live. Even though, you know, when we moved to California, I'm from San Diego, that's where we moved. My husband as well, but we are super commuters that live in Temecula. So what we have done is we have pushed off housing into more further flung areas because of our emotions. And now we've just created a vicious cycle where the places that we can build that are just more affordable by nature, all to the northeast of where I am right now, because it's just easier to build, are greenfield areas. And we're not, it's much more difficult to build in areas closer to where job centers are for a variety of reasons. And so this is just kind of a never-ending cycle that's just continuing to get worse.
Thank you, Ginger. And it's just a tragedy that it's both of these are public issues, public health, public impact the wallet, you know, in these times of inflation. And we also know that oftentimes the segment of the population that gets impacted the most are those with the least resources.
Absolutely.
Our disadvantaged community disproportionately impacted, and those that have historically borne the impacts of prior disinvestments. So could you, like, you've been close to this, and it is really informative from an affordable housing development perspective. You've worked with this clientele for decades now. Now, how would you say, how is the cycle, this vicious cycle that I described, worse for those with limited means and choices, and in terms of the economic burden?
Certainly. Well, not only has this been the population that I've been building housing for, and this is who I have been. I am the product of a low-income household. And so, just sort of pushing this out a little bit more, the folks who have no choice but to, commute to work in further flung places. Let's say you are working in hospitality in Del Mar, or you are working in hospitality pretty much anywhere on the coast. No one's going to pay you $150,000, $200,000 so that you can afford to live in an apartment in La Jolla. And so you are going to have to travel further. And so with additional commuting, is going to come reduced amount of time, but also increased costs if you have children for childcare. Just increased cost for travel alone. The time that it takes to commute if you are not driving is pretty extraordinary. It takes about 45 minutes to get on the trolley from, Lemon Grove trolley station to downtown San Diego is about 45 minutes there. And if you're driving, it's a little bit quicker, but we're trying to get folks out of their cars. So it's a compounding effect that, heard it yesterday in city council. You are not entitled to the housing item that was up is housing a human right at the San Diego City Council. And there were many callers that called in and said housing is not a human right, and that if you work hard enough, you can achieve what you want like they did. And that's just not an actual reality. And so these things are they're compounding one another. It is the most difficult for those who are on the lowest income stream, as most difficult things are, but it's just a compounding effect.
So thank you, Ginger. The purpose of this workshop and this series is to inform the development of our implementation playbook, where we're looking for specific actions that we can take individually, as businesses, as community, and as governments. So across all these different scales. So we're looking for solutions. And this is where, Alicia, thanks. This is where I've been asking for folks to focus on three potential areas. And so I'll go over each of them with you, Ginger, so we can cover as much as we can on the intersections between housing affordability, climate, and equity. So the first question is about justice and equity, in terms of in what way could the county address this issue about housing affordability in a humane way that also is a climate solution, particularly for disadvantaged communities?
Well, I think my answer is going to be the same for every one of these bullet points. I would first say that what you're doing right now is what you're doing, and what the county and what I do see the region doing as a whole right now is actually very encouraging. So I've been working in housing since the early 1990s and have seen firsthand the changing attitudes of elected officials in local government. And it is night and day right now. So I will say there's hope because the attitude is so different. The other thing of what you are trying to do right now is incredibly important, because you're trying to have every agency and organization that participates in the way that we utilize our land and the way that we move about within it trying to get everyone in lockstep, right? And coming up, so this right here is exactly what we need. I would say from just, really kind of getting down into the weeds as someone who has to go out and find money to pull together money for affordable housing, the more that plans, all the different types of plans, whether it be general plans, a municipal code, capital improvement plans, climate action plans, the regional housing plans, all of those, to the extent that those line up and that everyone is talking the same language and walking in the same direction, it makes it much easier for me to make the case to, say, Sacramento for funding that they have, that, San Diego is perfectly set up to receive this money to implement the goals of the state. Because at the end of the day, all of this takes money. If it were easy and if it were easily attainable, we would have plentiful housing. But the reality is it is wildly challenging and nearly impossible to just put together a single transaction and make it work at any moment in time. So I would just say, helping to create a pathway through having all the different types of agencies and organizations working in the same direction, which I know is pretty impossible, but you can't achieve it until you start doing what you're doing, which is to say we need to get everybody on board. Down at the local city level, if cities are putting together their capital improvement plans and creating, making sure there's sufficient water lines, making sure there's sufficient sewer lines, perhaps making sure even in the private sector that there is proper, sufficient electricity in a neighborhood. I know that, and I don't want to keep going on and on, I'm trying to be mindful of the time, but with respect to electrification, I'm building a project right now where I have to do these weird hoops to bring sufficient electricity to each building because there isn't enough electricity on this side of the street in the neighborhood. And so I can't quite explain what my dry utility consultants have concocted for us, but I just know it costs a fortune, right? And so, making sure that our infrastructure is sufficient in our infill areas is really important. Like you and I had talked about, Marcus, I said, we're not going to stop building out in other places if we're allowed to. I don't do this, but no shade to people who do, because they're providing housing, but it's so much less expensive and it's not controversial to build out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's yelling at you, nobody's yelling at the mayor, nobody's yelling at their county supervisors, and it's really inexpensive to do. Because what I do, which is building in neighborhoods that are 100+ years old, have 100+ years of a lot of problems that I also have to correct. And then I also have to meet all of the new standards of today. So it's incredibly expensive to build infill housing. And if you want to see it be more affordable, let's make the conditions as close to greenfield as possible with infrastructure that is already taken care of. And with, where one project built in 2022 isn't, addressing problems created in 1922.
Thank you so much, Ginger. We're so fortunate to have you on our planning commission, and thank you so much for joining us today and for your insight and wisdom. I think you covered all the questions I had, and our team is super excited. They've taken notes and will inform the implementation playbook. So thank you.
Really great job with what you're doing.
Take care.